Good Wednesday morning. I wanted just to share a little something with you from James, thinking about life and how short it is, how time flies. We always say that. I think that many of us who are my age or older begin to reflect on the brevity of life. We look at our grown children and maybe our grandchildren, and those of us who are pastors or teachers, etc., we can see in the children whom we've had the privilege and the blessing of baptizing or teaching, who have grown up and have had their own children. We see how fast that goes by. And then we begin to see other things. We notice our friends, our co-workers, family members, longtime pastors, even celebrities whom we have grown up with, and they've suddenly died. I was speaking to a fellow pastor just the other day, and we were sharing some thoughts along these lines. And while I don't think we ought to dwell on these things, I do believe that it's good to reflect now and then upon them so as to keep us humble and aware that we are not as in control as we imagine we are. Any one of us can be gone the next day. The world awakens and we're not there. The sun comes up, the birds are chirping, life goes on, and we're not there. Well, you say, Jack, that's depressing. Well, it can be. But for those of us who know the Lord, we know that it's not the end. But I wanted just to share briefly from James, the 4th chapter, verses 13 through 17, and what he tells us in regards to how we live out each day in light of the brevity of life. And I'm going to read this passage, and it is from the NASB, New American Standard Bible. So let me read this. James says, "Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we shall go to such and such a city and spend a year there and engage in business and make a profit. Yet you do not know what your life will be like tomorrow. You are just a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we shall live and also do this or that. But as it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. Therefore, to one who knows the right thing to do and does not do it, to him it is sin." Well, first, we don't know what the future holds for us, and we certainly cannot predict it. When we just decide to do something and we don't consult with God in prayer, we are acting as though there is no God. We are assuming that that is what we're going to do. Solomon in Ecclesiastes, he calls it a life under the sun. In other words, life as though God does not exist. John MacArthur, he said James does not condemn wise business planning, but rather planning that leaves out God. The people so depicted are practical atheists, living their lives and making their plans as if God does not exist. And that's kind of what we do when we just decide we're going to go do something without ever thinking about, well, what does he have for us in this? And so God disapproves of planning that leaves him out. James says there in verse 13, "Come now," or "now listen to those who decide and say, today or tomorrow we're going to go to this city, we're going to go to that city, we're going to engage in business, we're going to make a profit. This is what we're going to do." And we all say this. Some of you may remember Tom Brokaw used to close out the evening news, and he would say this, "See you tomorrow night." And I would say, maybe. And if we're honest about it, we all say we're going to do this or that, but we know that we may not get the chance. We may not get the chance to say, thank you, forgive me, I'm sorry, I love you, I'll be over tomorrow. You may never get that chance. A lesson I learned early on in my ministry came from a hospital visit. I went to make a visit, this older gentleman that was there. I spent a little time with him. We talked. But for whatever reason, I didn't pray with him. He said to me as I was walking out the door, "I'll see you tomorrow, buddy." But he didn't. He died that night. And from that time on, I have always made it a point, and I promised the Lord that I would pray, or I would attempt to pray, and for sure to share the gospel each opportunity that I get. I've never forgotten that. Verse 14. He says, "Yet you do not know what your life will be like tomorrow. You are just a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes away." So James expresses the brevity and the uncertainty of life. Job said, "My life is a breath." The psalmist said, "My days are like a shadow that lengthens, and I wither like grass." I have to consider God in my planning, for he may have something else in mind for me or for you. We have to trust him in our walk. We don't know what each day is going to bring, the end of the day or the beginning of the next day. So we look to him to guide us and direct us. Make those decisions in light of who he is and in light of who we are in our humanity. Fourth, verses 15 and 16, he says, "Instead you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we shall live and also do this or that. But as it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil." So James says it is, as it is, you boast and you're arrogant in it. And to do so, he says, is evil. John MacArthur notes this, that these are self-theists who would say this, refusing to submit the uncertainties of life to God. They set themselves, their own goals, their own wills above God. God's will, though acknowledged, simply is not important to them as their plans. They are arrogant because they are touting their own accomplishments and evil. And the evil being Poneros, a title for Satan, who is the original boastful sinner. So instead of saying we're just going to do this, we ought to say, if the Lord wills, I'll do this. Fifth, verse 17, he says, "Therefore, to one who knows the right thing to do and does not do it, to him it is sin." Well, we shouldn't act, or we should act in obedience to God. David Jeremiah, he notes that intentions are not actions. When God prompts believers to do something good, they should obey with a sense of urgency. So we shouldn't just assume that we're going to do this or that, or to act as though God has nothing to do with our decisions, that we know what's right for us without consulting him. Each day, each moment is a gift from God. He knows us. He knows our days. The psalmist said, "So teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom." That is, we should evaluate the use of our time, because life is short. It is as a vapor. The wise apply themselves to obtaining this heart of wisdom. And since true wisdom begins and ends with the Lord, we ask him to teach us. Teach us, Lord. Instruct us in this. Guide us, Lord. So may the Lord help us to see each day with him in mind, that he may illuminate our hearts and our minds, so that we will indeed use our time wisely. Because all we have to do is look around at our friends and our loved ones and those who have passed on. We just talked to them the other day, and they're gone. So may the Lord bless you. And we're going to be hoping to see some of you back at Antioch in the building. We are already, some are starting to filter in. June, we're opening up more. We'll be going back to some of our other activities. So Lord bless you, and we'll hope to see you soon.